Good morning. We have reached our final lesson in the Gospel of Matthew, lesson number 62. We're covering Matthew 28, verses 1 through 20, and this one's called We Serve a Risen Savior. For anyone who did not physically see the risen Christ, belief in the resurrection comes down to faith. As we are encouraged to walk by faith, not by sight, we are called to do what doubting Thomas struggled to do, to believe what we have not seen physically. But that does not mean that we cannot see spiritually. To me, faith never has been blind faith. Instead, faith is based on what we have seen before, prior experience, along with the expectation that God's promises will be fulfilled in the same way that they were fulfilled before. Standing on the promises of God. Jesus taught many things during his 3-year ministry upon this earth, and one of those was his own resurrection to come, whether or not the disciples, the multitudes, or even the Pharisees believed those previous statements. As Matthew 27 ended, the Jewish religious authorities asked Pontius Pilate for guards for the tomb. Those Jewish religious authorities obviously had listened to the words of Jesus when he claimed that he would rise from the dead on the 3rd day. While those authorities claimed that they wanted the guards to ensure that the disciples would not steal the body of Jesus and deceptively claim that he had risen from the dead, it also is more likely that these authorities were concerned that Jesus would do exactly as he said he would do and would rise from the dead. The topic of the resurrection is prevalent in Easter Sunday services, but otherwise is not taught often throughout the year. But the resurrection is perhaps the most important part of the lesson. We should discuss the resurrection of Jesus year-round, as it completely changes the message of Christianity. The resurrection is yet another example that everything Jesus taught either has been fulfilled or will be fulfilled. His words are truth. For Christians, there is no hope that we will be resurrected if Jesus was not resurrected. But it comes down to faith. There are many people claiming to be Christians who do not believe in the resurrection of Jesus. There also are denominations that do not believe in the resurrection, including Jehovah's Witnesses and Unitarian Universalists. We will have to see how God views that on Judgment Day, but my guess is that because the people have not believed the words of Jesus, they've called him a liar, and they will not gain entrance to heaven. Sadly, much of the world has created a huge divide between the belief in science and the belief in God. For those of us who believe in the God of the Bible, most of us still believe in God as creator. In his creation, God created everything that we can see and everything that we cannot see. He also created science, and it points to God rather than contradicts him. Throughout history, man always seems to change in regard to science and scientific beliefs. In fact, in the 1830s, doctors used bloodletting with leeches as the selected medical practice. Obviously, doctors today do not follow that same practice. In the same manner, chemotherapy is currently used to treat cancer. If mankind stays around for another 200 years, it is very likely that the people alive at that time will look upon chemotherapy in the same way that we look upon leeches, silly and archaic. That is because man continues to study, continues to learn, and continues to change beliefs. Yet the smartest scientists still know nothing in comparison to the God who created everything and knows everything. I think the problem that most people have in believing that the resurrection of Jesus actually took place is for those who cannot grasp that the God who created all the natural laws of this universe also has the ability to change those natural laws at any time. The miracles of Jesus, witnessed and experienced by many, certainly challenged those natural laws. Jesus walked on water. Jesus healed the sick. Jesus cast out demons. Jesus brought back dead people back to life. And Jesus rose from the dead. Most scientists would state that demons do not exist either. But most scientists have no understanding of the spiritual world. To me, it comes down to where to apply my faith, as belief in science takes more faith than belief in God. Do we have more faith in man, or do we have more faith in God? Part of that has to do with the fact that science does not solve the many problems of the earth. With that being said, in today's lesson, we have arrived at Resurrection Day in the life of Jesus. Let's read our first passage. Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 8 says this. Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. But the angel answered and said to the women, Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen as he said. Come, see the place where the Lord lay, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. So they went out quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to bring his disciples word. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary arrived at the tomb to anoint the body of Jesus. Obviously, neither of these women believed the previous words of Jesus concerning his resurrection, or they had not heard those words. They did not come to see the risen Jesus, but came to take care of his deceased body. Likely their biggest concern was how they were going to remove the stone that blocked that entrance to the tomb and gain entrance. The other Mary was likely the wife of Clopas, who also had been present at the crucifixion. Some scholars have stated that Clopas was the brother of Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus, and could be the same man identified later that day as Cleopas, whom Jesus appeared to on the Emmaus Road. There was an earthquake when Jesus died upon the cross, and another with these women at the tomb. Both the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus were earth-shaking experiences. In this explanation by Matthew, an angel descended from heaven, moved back the stone from the entrance, and sat upon it. The descriptions of this event are all slightly different in each of the Gospels. Does this suggest that the Bible conflicts itself or is untrue? Not even a little bit. People who are involved in stressful events can have different memories of those events. I can remember my mother and her brother discussing a stressful event that happened in their childhood. He had total recall of many specific aspects, and my mother did not even remember the event. In fact, she somehow was able to remove that event from all memory, though his memories brought her memories back after some discussion. We can think of the events of 9/11, and almost every survivor will have slightly different memories of what occurred on that day. Part of those differences might include the order of the events. But what will be a part of each person's memory is that the World Trade Center collapsed. That is similar to how we should view the different descriptions of the resurrection of Jesus. These memories might have differences, but what is not different is that everyone remembers that Jesus had risen from the dead. When reading the Gospels, look for the memories that are the same. In Matthew's description, the women were not the only ones there. In addition, the guards continued to keep watch upon the tomb, as they had been assigned. Seeing the angel, the guards shook with fear and became like dead men. It sounds like they fainted. Notice another important aspect. When the angel rolled back the stone, the tomb already was empty. It was not like Jesus had been placed in the tomb and simply appeared to be dead, but was still alive, and 3 days later waited for someone to open the tomb so he could get out. He already was raised from the dead and supernaturally emerged from a sealed tomb without moving the rock. The angel instructed these two women to immediately go and tell the disciples of Jesus that Jesus had risen from the dead. In an earlier discussion, Jesus had instructed his disciples to meet him in Galilee after his resurrection. Matthew says that these women departed the tomb with fear and great joy to share this news with the disciples of Jesus. I can understand the joy, but what were they afraid of? My guess would be that fear came from seeing an angel. In the Bible, any time angels appear to man, the statement commonly made by the angel is, "Be not afraid." Certainly, the natural reaction to seeing an angel is one of fear. I don't know if it has to do with their size, the fact that they glow, or simply being in the presence of something we cannot explain that brings a natural fear. Let's read the next passage. Matthew chapter 28, verses 9 through 10 says this. And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, "Rejoice." So they came and held him by the feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." Well, if seeing the angel and hearing of the resurrection of Jesus wasn't enough, Jesus also met these women and told them not to be afraid. Jesus also gave them the same instruction, asking them to tell the disciples to meet him in Galilee. It is likely that these women believed the words of the angel, but Jesus took this to another level by telling them the same instructions personally. These women saw him, touched him, held him by the feet, and worshipped him. There was no doubt in their minds that Jesus had risen from the dead, just as he claimed. Jesus made many prophetic statements concerning his resurrection to come. Some of these can be seen in Matthew 16:21, Matthew 17:23, Matthew 20:19, and Matthew 26:32. But there are also prophetic statements in the Old Testament that speak of the resurrection to come. Let's look at one of those. Psalm 16:10 says this, "For you will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption." First, we need to understand what Sheol is. In Luke 16, Jesus told a story of a rich man and a beggar who sat outside of the house of that rich man. Both died, and both went to a place known as Abraham's bosom. This is Sheol. Both of these men were in different parts of Sheol. The rich man was thirsty and was in torment, but not in as much torment as he would be in after the day of judgment, when he would be sent to the lake of fire and brimstone. The beggar, named Lazarus, was in a different part of Abraham's bosom, and it was not accessible from where the rich man was located. Lazarus was not in torment. Where Lazarus was located could also be identified as paradise. Don't forget, Jesus told one of the thieves on the cross that later that day, the thief would be with Jesus in paradise. After the resurrection of Jesus, it is my understanding that Lazarus is no longer in paradise, in Abraham's bosom, but his spirit and soul have gone to heaven. He does not yet have his glorified body, but that day is coming too. In this psalm, We see that Jesus also would go to Sheol, but he would not stay there. We also can see that the dead body of Jesus would not see corruption, would not decay or rot. When we think back to the resurrection of the other Lazarus, whom Jesus resurrected, Jesus did not get there until 4 days after the death of Lazarus. The Bible tells us that Lazarus stinketh. Jesus would not be in the grave long enough to have his body corrupted, because the Father would not allow that to happen. Let's read the next passage. Matthew 28, verses 11 through 15 says this. Now while they were going, behold, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests all the things that had happened. When they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, saying, Tell them, his disciples came at night and stole him away while we slept. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will appease him and make you secure. So they took the money and did as they were instructed, and this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day. The Bible does not tell us specifically how many guards were at the tomb of Jesus, but based on the Greek word used for guard in Matthew 27, it is thought that these were Roman soldiers, not Jewish temple guards. In those times, it was common for a guard of Roman soldiers to be 4 men. Regardless of the number, efforts have been made to ensure that the tomb remained sealed. Some of the guard who had been at the tomb came into the city to tell the chief priests what had occurred. This was an extremely tough moment for the chief priests. The smart thing for them to do would have been to admit that they had been wrong, but that does not often happen with people in positions of power or money, especially those who mislead others. It is one thing to mislead others when we have also been misled. But when confronted with the error of our ways, it is egregious behavior to continue leading others in the wrong direction when we know the truth to be something quite different. The Jewish religious leaders were still operating in protection mode and gave a large bribe to the soldiers. Their response was that the disciples came to the tomb and stole away the body of Jesus while they slept. It is difficult to understand how any amount of money could convince Roman soldiers to tell a lie like that, because Roman soldiers placed a high degree of emphasis on their own physical strength and power. How did 11 disciples get past their guard? If they actually claimed they were sleeping, then they were also admitting to failing in their duty, and it was a penalty punishable by death to sleep on duty. And if these disciples overpowered them, they would be admitting that they were incredibly weak. It must have been a lot of money. Let's read our final passage. Matthew 28, verses 16 through 20 says this. Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had appointed for them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen. This passage tells us that Jesus met with the 11 disciples in Galilee, which is where the headquarters of Jesus was located, and was also where most of the remaining disciples lived. This passage says that they saw Jesus, worshipped him, but some doubted. What did they doubt? Who were those who doubted? We really don't know, but think about this for a moment. Of all the disciples, only John had come to Golgotha and seen Jesus on the cross. I guess it is possible that some of them could have believed that Jesus actually was not crucified. None of these disciples had taken the body of Jesus off the cross and placed him in the tomb. That duty was done by Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Of course, we know from another gospel that even though the other disciples had seen the risen Jesus, Thomas had not, and stated that until he placed his hands into the wounds of Jesus, he would not believe. They were not eyewitnesses, other than the arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. But what was it that they doubted? Did they doubt that Jesus had died? Did they doubt that Jesus had been resurrected? Did they doubt that this was Jesus standing in front of them? Did they doubt the teachings of Jesus they had once believed? I still think this has to do with the prophetic passages in Isaiah that tell us that Jesus was beaten so badly that his visage was so marred that he no longer looked like a man. Another passage said that they plucked out his beard. This doubt could simply have been the inability to recognize the physical attributes of the man they knew as Jesus. But as the Gospel of Matthew ends, Jesus assigns these 11 disciples with the Great Commission. Make disciples of all nations, all peoples. When we think about what those 11 disciples were able to accomplish, it reveals how convinced that they were that the words of Jesus were absolute truth. The resurrection of Jesus removed any doubt. All of these men were so convinced that they were willing to die for Jesus. John was exiled rather than martyred, but was willing to go to any extent to share the gospel. The Great Commission continues today, though now there are many generations of believers that have come to the Lord. But we are still called to make disciples of all peoples and nations. That does not mean that we should tell someone about Jesus, have them repeat the sinner's prayer, and move on to the next person. We are to walk with them, spend time with them, be willing to share the gospel and share the lessons we have learned while following the gospel, while following Jesus, and all the other words of the Bible. That is discipleship. But it all comes back to the resurrection of Jesus. Because he lives, we have a future and a hope. We should all be willing to share the same love that we have received. Thanks to all who shared this journey with me through the Gospel of Matthew. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.